PhD in Progress, Episode 15. This week we discuss the financial basics of priorities, budgets, and credit with Patricia Berhau. Let's go!
Right, the shoe fly pie.
Yeah, oh my god. Guys.
Welcome back to the PhD in Progress podcast, where we talk about your education, your career, and your life. I'm Jason.
And I'm Kelly.
And today we're here with Patricia, who is, what was it called? An assistant...
Asset Building Coordinator.
Yes, an ABC, Asset Building Coordinator with a group called ISLES.
Mm-hmm.
Today we want to talk about improving your financial situation and learning a little bit more. So the broad topics we'll talk about are how to make more thoughtful decisions with your money. We'll try to understand financial concepts in general, because if you're coming from undergrad, going straight to grad school, you might not have had a chance to understand the workplace, understand budgeting, living on your own. You might be living in a dorm or grad student housing. So different decisions you have to make there. And then we'll name a couple of action items we can perform in order to improve our status with our money. Okay? Tell us a little bit about yourself, Patricia.
Okay. Well, as you said, I work at an organization called ISLES, which is a nonprofit organization in the area. We're headquartered in Trenton, but work with communities throughout central New Jersey, Mercer County. Specifically in our department, we call ISLES Financial Solutions personal finance services. So I do education and personal finance coaching, kind of like having a personal trainer for your money. We work with people individually and sometimes in groups as well. But in a previous life, somewhat coincidentally, truly, I was a graduate student and completed a PhD in sociology. Quite a long ways back now, it seems. But I did that and lived in a few different places. I'm from the New York area originally, lived in the Midwest, came back to Philadelphia area, lived abroad for a number of years, and have been in this area for about 11 years now. And I have 3 kids and was home with them for a number of years after finishing my PhD.
And so what was your PhD in?
I was sociology, and I used ethnographic research methods to study consumer issues. So there's both I've long had an interest both personally and professionally in issues of consumption. And that's not because I'm a big shopper, right? If anything, it's kind of the opposite. I guess I've always been a little on the frugal side, which I'm sure will come up as we're talking. So I did research on people's experiences as consumers and how that varies by social class.
So now in your current position, what types of financial advice are you giving, to what types of people?
Mm-hmm, yeah. So we work primarily with moderate and low income folks. The services that we do offer at ISLES, we offer primarily through employers. So Princeton University, for example, offers our services as a benefit to employees. As I said, we're higher income consumers. It's not that they don't need these types of services. We tend to not, focus on the issues that are some of the longer range issues that those folks might be more interested in focusing on. Tends to be on personal finance of everyday things like budgeting, credit issues, bankruptcy, understanding, various loan options, things of that sort.
So, kind of people like us?
You're familiar with, or at least day-to-day finances.
Yes.
Maybe not so much. And you brought up this point before, and maybe we'll get into it right now. We'll get into the meat of the conversation. So, the first thing you said that was important was to assess our situation financially.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that you mentioned was that we have to acknowledge that our status as a grad student and the income we're getting, while it's fairly fixed is temporary. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I mean, when we talk to people about their finances, I always want to talk to them both about what's been happening in the past. So for example, if someone has debt that they're concerned about, I want to understand how that came about. And the reason isn't just because I'm nosy, is because that will help me understand the solutions that make the most sense. If somebody gets into a lot of credit card debt because they were unemployed for a short period of time, or somebody was sick or something like that, that's different than if I see a chronic situation where over and over and over again, they just don't have enough money to support their lifestyle, their life. So that will suggest a different solution. And I also want to know from people what they see for themselves in the future. What is it that they want to be happening down the road? So for yourselves, for example, the typical graduate student does live on a pretty limited budget, in terms of how much their income is right now. And there's no question about that. And I was just like everyone else. I would, poor pitiful me, the starving graduate student, kind of thing, which is absolutely true, not to deny that. But we also can't kid ourselves with you all, as graduate students, especially at, depending on your field, some more than others, but you have a reasonably good prospect of a different situation going forward. So while it's true that right now the funds that you have to get through the month may not be terribly different from someone who, as a adult, an older adult, for example, is trying to get by with that. It is different because of your prospects for the future, and that is something to acknowledge. And perhaps your broader family situation as well. What would you have to look back, fall back on if you really did get into some financial trouble? Might be different than somebody who's just earning this money forever.
Because one thing about graduate students is that typically this is our first kind of step into the real world. So, financially we might not have a track record of our behaviors beforehand. You know, mommy and daddy may have been handing out funds to us, or, maybe we had a summer job, lifeguarding, you spend it to go see a girlfriend across the country or buy a car, or, it's for a specific purpose. Yeah. And now we have this fixed income, which is also really exciting that we're making money for the first time. And it's like, I now have numbers in my account, and I can use those numbers to buy things. Right. So that's always really exciting, but it's no longer this sort of instant satisfaction with the money that you experienced in high school. Like, you get a summer job so you can pay for this kind of thing. Now it's, I have a little bit of money. I have this thing called a future that's going to happen at one point, but, how do I handle that right now and not just blow it all?
And there are ways in which it is sort of an odd time. That whole graduate student moment is a transition, to be sure, right? You're not an undergraduate anymore. You're not perhaps, everybody's different, but as dependent, on your folks the way you might have been, or whatever adults in your life. But you don't kind of feel like 100% maybe, you're in your full quote unquote adult life yet. And I know there are so many different situations. People do have kids and they're married and maybe have a partner who already has a quote unquote proper job. So, they're all different variations. All different, that's my time in England going on. They're all different variations, on that theme. But it does, for most people when they're in graduate school, it is sort of a transition. And that can make it feel like, so sometimes it makes it feel like, why bother? I don't have enough money to do much with it yet, so I'm not there yet to be somebody who can do anything about my money. And that I certainly understand why people feel that way. It's not exactly true in the sense that, in a few different ways. One, like we talked about, what you can be doing right now about your money is sort of taking stock. And part of that is really acknowledging who you are when it comes to money. What are your habits? What have they been? Are you somebody who, money just flies through your hands? You feel guilty when you buy X, later on. Maybe people call you cheap, is there anything to that? Just sort of having a bit of a reflection on your own habits and styles is good. And part of the reason for doing that, a little bit like we talked about earlier, is that might feed into any remedies that you wanted to put into place. If you find, when you're even putting together a budget, you want to acknowledge certain things about your habits and the way you go about things in order to make that successful. You want to structure it in a way that acknowledges who you are.
So is it okay to acknowledge, the fact that I might like to spend money on shoes? Is that something that I could set a financial priority on?
I would say not only is it something you can, I would say you should. Because the goal is to be successful and to create a plan for your money that you can successfully stick to. I don't love these analogies because nobody likes to talk about diets, but it's kind of a little bit like when you think about trying to have some success with managing your weight. If you're one of these people, and I'll call my husband out on this because he'll do this from time to time, all of a sudden, here it is, Monday morning in a given, whatever, after maybe too gluttonous of a weekend. That's it. Carrots and celery. I'm not eating anything else. He starts off with this sort of completely ascetic, sort of diet and of course 3 days later, that is not workable and he's, exactly where he started. Now, sometimes you need to give yourself a jolt, right, of something so that encourages you. And it's like that with money, too. Maybe you need to, set yourself a goal and find some real success to show yourself that you can set some money aside or whatever it is. But if you create a plan for your money that doesn't acknowledge in any way that shoes are important to you and that, you're going to be really sad and angry and not stick to this, you'll wind up, quote unquote, cheating with shoes. If you don't acknowledge that, then you're probably not going to be successful. So what I would say, and we can talk a little bit more about these strategies with the budget, is to find a way to acknowledge it. Maybe you don't use it get as many as you would have gotten. There are a lot of ways to fit it in there.
So something I thought, and now that we're talking about it, I kind of realized grad school is sometimes an interesting situation because I know of, my 50, 60 grad student friends or acquaintances, we all basically make the same amount. Yet, if you look at the lifestyles we live, they have to be different on some level.
Yeah.
So I know if I were being more understanding with my finances when I started as a younger grad student, going back to me in like 2008 or 9 when I was first starting, I'd be making very different situations with my money because I didn't come in at the same with the same situation as some of my friends. Like I have a large amount of student loan debt, but when I looked at my friends, like going out on awesome vacations every year, couple years or whatever, I should have been making different decisions, and I think that's one of the psychologically rough parts because we know that we all earn the same amount,
right? But you don't all have the same situation. That's it's a really important point. And it speaks to what we're talking about now, this sort of whole acknowledgement thing. You can't spend anybody else's money but your own. And so you don't know, first of all, there are so many things, people don't really talk about money too much. Your friend, like you say, who's going on vacation, maybe comes from a family that has, quite a lot of money, and so they have access to resources that perhaps you don't. Maybe they know they'll be going into, maybe their prospects after graduation are different than yours, depending on the field that they'll be going into. Or simply they have different priorities than you do. Maybe they really care about travel and whatnot. And at the end of the day, you might be somebody who that is not all that important to. Those are the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself. What do I really care about? Because sometimes you start doing things and making financial decisions just based on a general understanding of what an average, normal, middle class, I work hard, I went to school, shouldn't I be able to go out to dinner, buy a car, have a vacation? And that may all be true. But at the end of the day, it's down to math. And you're the one who's going to be paying back those loans after school is out. You're the one who's going to get the credit card bill and have to pay that. And like I said, you don't know. Maybe somebody else is paying your friend's credit card bill. So you have to keep your own situation and what's important to you in mind. In some ways, it reminds me of a story when I finished undergraduate, but before I started graduate school, I had my proper job. And there was a woman that I worked with who kind of took me under her wing. She was very nice. We used to have lunch together and whatnot, a little bit older. And I had a lousy car, really, really lousy car. And she was sort of like, oh, you can't drive a car like that. You need, like a regular car. And so on our lunchtime, we even went to like a car dealer at one point.
You need a proper car for a proper
job. Well, the other one I had was really bad. It wouldn't even go in reverse after a while. It was like,
you did.
I was good at parking like right on the corner and all the pull-in spots. It was great. Anyway, so I kind of got swept up in that almost for a moment, and then I sort of stopped and thought, what am I doing? Why am I committing myself to this car loan? I don't even know. I wanted to maybe move to a different city, which I ultimately did. I wound up taking a trip where I had no income for like 3 months. I was traveling by bicycle, and I would not have been able to do that if I had a, $300 a month car payment. So, I almost got swept up into her understanding, and she was being nice, she wasn't doing it in a kind of any malicious way, but it was up to me. I was the one who was going to have to pay that bill. So I had to think about what my interests and goals were, and that debt would have restricted my options in a way that would not have been good for me. So that's another. So all of this is part of that. Like, who am I? What do I care about when it comes to money? If I don't care about cars that much, for example, then it's stupid. If you do like cars, that's great. Cars are fun. Why not?
It sounds like you're right in the perfect spot to go into a PhD program studying consumer relations or whatever. That's right.
Yeah. Because, like I said, it was kind of those kinds of things were on the brain, I would say, for sure.
Yeah. Now that we talked about understanding your situation and assessing, that everything's kind of temporary and figuring out, how you feel, what types of priorities you might have to choose over another, and comparing yourself to others, which was, it's hard not to do in grad school. Absolutely. You're surrounded by people all the time. I guess maybe let's talk about specific concepts in finance, specifically because when I was in undergrad, I didn't have to worry. I mean, I worked my job, wasn't that major. I, worked my job in order to feed myself while I was going to school the whole time, but other than that, I didn't think about things like retirement or really like credit or anything else.
Sure.
So I guess let's talk about a few of those things. And one of the major things when you're trying to be responsible with money is to budget, right? And budget, when you talk about it at first, it sounds like this big scary thing where you're like going on a diet, like we mentioned.
Absolutely.
Where at first you hear budget and you're like, I need to slash everything and just live on the essentials. But really it means just figuring out what you want to do with your money.
Exactly.
And put it to use in a good way.
Yeah.
So,
there's a quote I have. I don't mind Dave Ramsey. I'm not like a big fan of Dave Ramsey, but I have no issue with him. Lots of people.
I'm kind of the same way.
I have plenty of people. There are a lot of money people out there that have bits and pieces of good advice. I don't think I buy into 100% what anybody says, and he's a good example. But anyway, he does have a quote I like, which is, a budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. So it really is about having a plan, and you're absolutely right when you say people hear the budget. We actually don't use that word. We try not to use that word. We call it a saving and spending plan. Exactly.
Financial euphemism. I like this.
Anything to get in and change people's brains, and because it really is just that. Some people think that I don't have enough money to budget because they feel like, or they are so strapped that there's really not a point. So the futility aspect sometimes stops people from doing it. But really, like you say, if you think of it from the perspective of what I'm doing is taking stock, again, of what kind of income and expenses I have right now. and how do I match those up, and how do I make them reflect the things that are important to me? And right now, the thing that is important to you may be simply getting out of grad school without incurring further debt, or something like that, right? It doesn't have to be grand at the moment.
That's my goal.
Yeah, so that's right. It's a little bit of treading water, but you're investing right now in your future by being in the program that you are. So that's a sound financial decision right there. So even if you're not getting ahead, quote unquote, financially in terms of putting money in retirement, like you say, you're still doing something that's quite positive. I would clearly argue for your financial future. But the budget, really, there are a bunch of different reasons to do a saving and spending plan. One, I would say, is to think of it both in terms of having a plan of what's going to happen with your money, and also it can help to keep you on track. So the fact that you've written it down and you can see in black and white, or on the computer screen or on your phone, or whatever makes you happy, what's supposed to be happening in raw numbers, that in and of itself, because often we have a sort of, we have that niggling feeling that we can't really afford to go to the IV for a drink or, whatever it may be. But until you see the number and you really understand the choices you're making, because it's a zero-sum game, the money comes out of one part of your plan and goes, and, if it goes to something else, that means it's not going to be there for something that may be more important to you, like a little vacation or something, or food, so that becomes much clearer when you have a plan.
And that's really when your priorities come into play, right? Where you're like, I really want to
That's right.
get out of debt.
That's right.
For example.
That's right.
You have to make that decision. Do I go get a deliciously terrible burger at McDonald's, or do I spend that $10 and pay off further on my credit card?
How many days do I have to wait outside of lunch lab meetings to get free food?
Oh, yes. I saw those bagels out in Gio, by the way, in that next building. Oh,
Scouring
man.
campus
I'm waiting,
for, pizza situations.
Free bagels.
Yeah, trash diving. Comes to diving for free food.
Seen it.
Yeah, so you want to get your dignity back.
I'm budgeting
I
for
get
dignity.
it. I get it. Yeah, people will start recognizing you at various breakfast buffets around campus. Okay, so that's cool. And one more thing about the saving and spending plan before we definitely want to talk about how to go about it and what goes in it is, I would say, improved communication, especially if you have a partner. If it's not just about yourself, it's a really useful thing, and it could be just a conversation with yourself or with your partner where, you sit down together and say, this is what's supposed to be happening with our money. So then when the other person, like I say, or even you, wants to do something different from that, it's a little less personal. And so it's like, look, these are the numbers. This is what we talked about. This is what I decided, was important. And now I want to do something else. And that doesn't mean you can't change it and say, okay, let's do something else. I hadn't realized how important, shoes were to me or something. But it gives you a way. It's a vehicle to sort of have that conversation as well. So I don't know, have you guys done a budget? Or a plan for your money?
Actually, you've mentioned Dave Ramsey, and I've listened to his show a few times, and actually I listen to it regularly. He's kind of more religious in that regard, and that drives him, but some of his advice is really good for me personally, so, as always, you take what's good for you and discard the rest.
Yep.
There are a ton of popular financial people, Susie Orman. I guess those are probably the big two.
Yeah, you do see a lot of those.
And if you like podcasts,
Gene Chatsky,
If you do like podcasts, like our podcast, you can listen to Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman. They both have their shows recorded every day or whenever they do them. So I've learned a lot through that. And personally, over the last year, implementing a budget for myself, I've just seen how much money I spend on stuff I shouldn't be. But B, also I've been able to just pay off my car completely by figuring out a budget, figuring out I shouldn't be spending that stuff. I stopped.
Or that you have a different priority.
Yeah, I was able to set my priorities better. At the end of the day,
it's more important to you to pay the car off
than
those other things that you were spending it on, so you decided to do things differently.
Yeah, and it took budgeting and just writing it all on paper. Yeah. Actually, I used the tool Mint.
Yeah, that was definitely,
So I use that every I set up my budget every month when I
Yeah.
have to change things for, like, maybe if I know a birthday's coming up and I need to get someone a present, I budget more for that.
Right.
Take away from my restaurant eating.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
I have never created a true budget for myself, but, I kind of work on, I know I have to pay a certain amount for my apartment every month, and that's sort of set. It maybe changes with new lease renewals and things like that, but I always just have in mind, because we only get paid once a month.
Oh, I see.
So, to go through that month without any inflow is really difficult. So I basically always just tell myself, you have $1,000 to play with for the month. So if my credit card goes over $1,000 for the month, I'm like, okay, you need to start cutting back now. But
next wire.
But so it's not really an official budget, but I just look at that number and I'm like,
strategies for yourself that work.
Yeah, and it's not like a clear cut thing. It's more sort of hand wavy. I can use that $1,000 however I want to, but. It's like...
But there's a limit.
Yeah, as long as it stays under $1,000. In some months, it does not.
Right.
Especially for grad students. I don't know how it works at other institutions, but for traveling to conferences and things like that, that's a big expense.
Right.
And so for the way our system does it here, we put all the money up front.
Right.
And then we get reimbursed for it later. But sometimes that reimbursement, you have to plan for the conference months in advance.
Yeah.
You go to the conference, then you don't get reimbursed for months later.
Yeah, it's tough.
So it's a long time. So I always end up pulling money actually out of my savings to pay off those credit card bills.
Right.
And then once the money comes in from the reimbursement, I just put that directly back into my savings.
But that makes sense. I mean, you don't want to be paying interest on it. And
exactly.
I do hate reimbursements in general. It drives me out of my mind.
Yeah.
My husband does. There's a lot of that, and I give him a hard time almost every time. But that's a great way to do it, because the amount that you're getting in interest on a savings account is universally almost non-existent these days. That's the way it is, and that benefits us when we pay interest on, mortgages and other kinds of loans right now, but we lose out on the other end, unfortunately, with our savings. But that's a great way to do it. And the fact that you're going to get it later. But that whole, whatever system one comes up with, again, there's not one right way to do anything like this, which is part of the reason why it is good to hear from a lot of different voices. Like you said, you might take some things that one, personal finance guru has to say, or one trusted website, and we'll put some things on the website after this of places that you can go to get some reliable information on money. But whatever it is that works for you, it is fine. There's not just one particular way to do it. One thing I would say, so in terms of setting up, if you haven't done it before and you're trying to set up a saving and spending plan, there are a couple of components that are really crucial. So one is obviously the easiest ones to put into your plan are, like you say, your pretty regular, pretty fixed expenses, right? Your rent, if you've got, depending, if you're paying extra on an energy bill and that's more or less the same each month, that might vary. We can talk about that. Your cable or your phone plan or, whatever it is. Those things are pretty much the same every month. Those are the no-brainers. And everybody can plan around those, right? The other ones are things that are also pretty regular, more or less monthly, but they're more variable. So, for example, groceries. You might spend more on groceries one month than another. It's not like a bill that shows up and tells you to pay $100. You're going to spend what you spend. Gas, prices go up, this and that. So again, it comes up every month, but it does have some more variability to it. So for those, especially those, you really want to be tracking what you're spending, because that's the only way you can really know what's happening. And you can do that. You had mentioned, Jason, about mint.com, which is really handy and also somewhat painful, because it does not lie. It will tell you exactly how much you spent at the Princeton Pie pizza place or anywhere you used your debit or credit, right?
Yeah, and also you have the option to put in whatever loans you have out or credit cards, and so it shows you how much you're worth.
Your net worth. That's
and
cruel.
to know how many negative tens of thousands of dollars I'm worth at this point in my
right.
life. I'm like,
I know.
wow, if I die today,
but it does speak the truth, and again, it can't help you if you're paying for things with cash. So again, if that is a method that you use and that is the most useful thing for you, some people like the physicality of cash, and that's a good method. Somebody will say, okay, I have $50 in my wallet, and that's all I'm allowed to spend this week on, miscellaneous. And so they know when they're down to zero, even though it's Thursday afternoon, they're cooked, and that's one way to do it. If that works for you,
you're out with your friends, you look in your wallet, you're like, oh, I have no money.
Yeah.
Guess who's paying?
That's right. I mean, whatever works, there's nothing wrong with that. But another way to do it is you can monitor your situation on Mint, like you say, or there are a lot of different apps like that. There was an article in the New York Times last January that outlines a whole bunch of them and gives reviews and whatnot, so you can find something there. Yeah, it's a good one. And that will give you the cruel pie chart that even will break down like groceries, and it knows what's a grocery store, and it can figure out, and you could be surprised because you might realize you spent a lot more, maybe at Wawa or whatever it is, than you thought you were. You didn't realize that it was costing you quite so much for lunch, etc. So that once you keep track, now you can have some realistic numbers in your plan, because your plan is only useful if it reflects reality. There's no point in lying on it and saying, oh, I spend $10 a month on lunch, when in really you're spending $80, okay, because you're just kidding yourself, and there's no benefit to that. So tracking your expenses, whether it's with Mint or some other device like that, writing things down on paper, keeping receipts and tallying it up later, whatever works for you is fine, but you want to have some way. And you don't have to necessarily do that forever. Once you've gotten a handle on it, and how much you're allowed to spend, then you can figure out ways of keeping to that. And there are a bunch of ways of doing it. But before we get to that, I just want to finish up. So the regular things, these sort of regular but variable things, but the last, well, of course, then your income is also in your spending and saving plan, But the other part of the expenses that is absolutely crucial, and if you remember one thing that we talk about today, this is it. Listen up.
All right.
Okay, it's all of the irregular things, the sort of budget busters that you can think of, right? Mm-hmm. Your car might, is going to break down. You got to go to a wedding. You maybe have dental work done. I mean, fill in the blanks. Whatever, if you can say the sentence of, everything was going along fine until fill in the blank, You've got kids, it could be birthday parties or Christmas or, holiday celebrations, whatever it is for you. And it does help to think a little bit through the year, or you maybe look back at old credit card budgets, right? Vacation. Remember what all of those things are. Whether they were things that you did by choice, like you said, vacation, because maybe you really needed a mental break and you did go and take that week long in the Caribbean and whatever. Be honest with yourself. Take all of those things. Imagine that, yes, they will all happen in the next year. Add it up. Whatever that figure comes out to in total. Let's say it's, okay, let's just imagine it's $1,500. Okay? Then my advice is this. You divide by 10 because it's easiest. And you say, part of your plan is that $150 every single month gets put into, sort of a reserve or a set-aside account. Mm-hmm. Every single month. So say now you've been doing that for 3 months, right? You've got $450 in there. So now if something does happen to the car, you're allowed to take the money out of there. You haven't saved all of the amount maybe that you had decided you needed for the car, but you've saved some of it, you're allowed to take from it. You keep, next month you do the same thing. You replenish with another 100. So you're constantly putting money into that, and you're probably also constantly pulling some money, as long as it's for one of those things that you are saving it or setting it aside for, not even saving. See, because people think they can't save, quote unquote, because they don't have enough money to save, right? But this isn't saving. This is putting it aside because you're going to need it and just planning for that.
Yeah.
One
piece of advice I had gotten, you kind of maybe touched on it a little bit, is to sort of have an account for everything. Basically, a designated account for just in case moments, a designated account for vacations, where you're putting little bits of money for specific reasons. Groceries, maybe you're combining with your partner, that you're both putting money into that account for mutual groceries every month. So
Right. I mean, I think a couple of things. It is really important. When your money is all in one big glob, that makes it very tricky. Even if you're on Mint and you know what you're supposed to do, that makes it very tricky. So what I often talk to people about is finding their major expenses. So I do this for myself, right? We have one credit card in my house that we use only for groceries and gas. So we decided about how much is reasonable for us to spend on gas and groceries every month. And I can check any time to see where we are in terms of how much we've spent that much, because I pay the bill entirely in full when it arrives every single month. So it's always gone down to a zero balance. So all it should, and I'm not paying interest on it. So I'm using my credit card as a vehicle of, budgeting, if you will. So this is one way of keeping that money separate. So I know it's not in the general pool, because then when the bill comes, I'm going to send every last penny of that to the credit card company. And I'm able to monitor and say, oh, the end of the billing period is the 25th. It's only the 18th, and yet we're already at our maximum. Let's look in the pantry. We're not going to the supermarket. And that sort of puts the brakes on things. One thing I talk to people about that way like that, if groceries, say you would like to go to Trader Joe's, and you've decided that you're allowed to spend $80 a month there. Well, I'm sure you can get a gift card from Trader Joe's. Go and give them $80. Get the gift card, and then, it doesn't cost you anything. Now you've gotten that money out of your life already, but you have the ability to use it over the next month, so you don't look at your bank account and think, oh, look at me, I've got $800 there, because you don't really have. This way you've eliminated some of those monies. I eliminate my gas and grocery money by paying that in one big thing for my credit, because then I know how much it is. So breaking things into categories, and the same thing, when you're setting money aside, you can lump it all into one place and keep a list of what's going in there is going in there, or you could have separate accounts. Whatever it is that works for you is important. And just to bring it back, I mentioned before dividing it by 10. The only reason I do it that way is because I'll know I want to give myself a break, like twice a year. Like I'll have 2 months. I'll just say, okay, December, even though, yes, I am saving to spend on the holidays, it's always more expensive somehow than I think it's going to be. So I am not setting money aside in December. And then I might say the same thing about the summertime, because I know summer is more expensive. There are things going on. I don't want to have to save, set any money aside in July. So that's why I chose 10 months, because it feels a little less constraining as well. It gives me some choice, and that helps me stay with it.
And if you do end up saving on those months, then that gives you a little extra cushion.
That's right. That's right. So whatever, it's sort of part of it is just don't kid yourself. Don't pretend that cars don't break down. Even good cars break down, and even if you have a newer one with the warranty, the brakes go and need to be replaced. The tires need to be replaced. It's expensive.
Amen to that.
A little too close. A little too close.
Well, it comes down to the fact that when something like that happens, you've already spent the money in the future, so you might as well do it the smartest way possible to at least save on money. Like if you put it on a credit card, then you have to pay off interest if you can't afford it at that point. No. But you could have planned ahead.
Yeah, don't kid yourself. That's the thing. Exactly. It's sort of like I say to people, I'm like, okay, if I pretend I could give you $1 million right now, if you could guess within, $200 how much you're going to spend on car maintenance and repairs this year. Well, I bet you could get pretty close. So why not do that? Why not get pretty close and then count on it? Like I said, and if it doesn't happen this year and the car never does, have a real breakdown, well, isn't that nice? And now you have a little extra money, and then you won't have to save it, set it aside next year, or you could use it for something else, or, whatever. But you don't want to be stuck in a cycle. That's how you don't get into credit card debt, is by being realistic about those are the things that bust people's saving and spending plan, not the regular stuff in life. We all know what the rent is going to be and this and that. It's that stuff that really makes a difference.
So when you're making a plan, what sort of time scale do you work on? Do you start at a monthly budget and then sort of look at the year as a whole and then break down those yearly things into a monthly bits and piece?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. Because it does, you do, on the one hand, of course, we do live on a monthly basis. That's when most bills and expenses, at least, or a lot of the ones that show up at your door or online, in your inbox or whatever, are monthly bills. So that's what just makes sense in terms of organizing your life. But this is the problem. If you're only thinking within a given month, like I have X income and X expenses in a 1 month period, you're forgetting about variation. And even if your income is in fact consistent, which for most people that is, and if it isn't, that's another thing that one needs to be prepared for. It's your expenses that are sort of doing this up and down thing. But you don't have to be a victim of that. You can straighten that up and down line by creating this situation of setting money aside every month for those things that you are pretty sure are going to be happening. That's the way you impose a sense of predictability over what otherwise might be an unpredictable situation. Nice. Helps to keep you out of trouble, I swear. It really is the most, and often people will do this, they'll go through, putting together a plan for your money is a process. You do it once, most times I'll do it with folks, and we often end up with a negative number. We'll put in their expenses, monthly, irregular, how much they genuinely need to be putting aside, and they'll come up with a negative figure. A lot of times that's because they've been using credit cards to supplement their income. And again, that may or may not be okay. It depends on, what the interest is, what your future prospects are, how quickly you think you'll be able to pay it off, all of that, whatever. But you should make a decision about that and acknowledge that that's what's happening. That, if you started out the year with no credit card debt and you ended it with $3,000 in credit card debt, it means you spent $3,000 more than came in. That's just the way it is. So either you take out a loan, because that's what you've done, at a pretty high interest rate usually, if you're doing it with credit cards, or better yet, change your situation. And there are only really 2 ways to do that, or 3. More money coming in, less money going out, some combination of the 2.
Yeah.
That's it. There's no magic to it. It really is. If you're, and again, if you do have credit card debt, that might be okay. I mean, nobody wants to be in that situation, and there are different ways to deal with it. I don't know how much we want to get into. But whatever it is, you need to be aware of what it is you're doing. This goes back to that thing we said from the beginning of assessing your situation, what's important to you. You might look at that at the end and say, fine, right now that's the cost of doing business, for me and my life, and I'm going to let that happen for the next, year and a half, and then I'm going to clean it up, or, whatever. I'm not saying you can't do that, but you should at least acknowledge it and understand what's happening and decide, yes, it's really important that I keep this car, or I eat this way, or I give these kinds of presents when I go to a wedding, and so that's causing me debt, and I'm taking on interest for it, but at least you should own that and be conscious of what it is you're doing, if that's your choice.
Yeah, because that's one of the major things, and another topic that we want to touch on is credit.
Mm-hmm.
Because in these times, it's one of the biggest things that you can do to help your future.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. We don't have accounts to set aside for retirement or anything like that. We live on a fixed income, monthly basis kind of thing. So one of the best things that you can be doing for yourself is maintaining good credit to set yourself up for taking out loans or buying houses or buying cars in the future.
Right.
So how about some advice on how to do that?
How to do that? Well, you're absolutely right. Credit is one of these things that has grown enormously in importance. So a couple of things about that. And it's not all intuitive how to keep or maintain a good credit profile. So first of all, just some basics. Your credit history is based on any time that you are borrowing money or given a good or a service without paying for it more or less immediately. And the things that are on your credit report are student loans, car loans, mortgages, and then any kind of credit cards, things like that. Generally speaking, your apartment rent is not on a credit report, your energy bills, your cell phone bills. So if you're
So if you don't pay them immediately, that's not...
okay, you're right.
Not completely true. Okay.
Well, no, it's a little bit true. So what happens is with those, the cell phone contract, for example, is a great example. They do not report, the cell phone company, Verizon or whoever, they do not typically report information every month to the three major credit bureaus, which are TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. Those are the bodies that collect all the information from companies about anybody who has been extended credit, right? So Verizon doesn't send that to them every month. But if you start being late to the point where it goes to collection, you just walk away from it, whatever, now they tell the credit bureaus about it. And now it shows up on your credit report. Okay? So your landlord is not likely, even if it is a development, frankly, even if you're late with it, and I'm not saying you should be late with it, but that is not going to be reported to the credit bureaus when you're, 3 days late with the rent or 10 days late with the rent or whatever. If you walk away from a lease and you owed your landlord $3,000 and they take you to court, etc., now we're going to your credit report. If they, all those kinds of things. So there are some things that you don't get credit, so to speak. You don't get the pat on the back for all the good stuff you might do about those kinds of bills in your life. It's only when they go bad that it might go onto your credit report, okay? So what matters in terms of, so it's all that kind of stuff. What gets reported is how much have you borrowed? What are your bills? How much you're supposed to be paying the company every month? Are you paying on time? If you're not paying on time, how far behind are you? Did you let it go 30 days late? Did you let it go 60 days late? 90 days late? That's all on your credit report. And I would absolutely 100% suggest that everybody get a copy of their credit report. We are all entitled to one free copy from each of the three credit bureaus that I just named annually, every single year. Okay?
Oh.
So the way you access that is by going to a website, annualcreditreport.com. And when you go on there, you'll fill out some information, including your social security number. It's a secure, meant to be, should be site, so it's fine. And they will direct you, they'll ask you which report you want. And you'll say, okay, fine, let me have TransUnion today. So they'll then direct you to TransUnion, and you can pull up right then and there a free copy of your report, or they can mail it to you, however you want to do it. What you won't get for free, though, is your score. The score is not exactly the same. The report is all the information that the score is based on, but the score is like the actual grade. What's your final grade here? For that, even at that site, they would charge you. I want to say it's like $14 or something like that. But it's up to you. If you want to see the score, you can do it that. So again, it's annual credit report, not freecreditreport.com, which was, that guitar guy.
So what do you think about those websites?
The FTC finally shut those people down. I think it was just
really?
Yeah, because it was completely misleading. It's not, what happens with a lot of those is they'll sign you up and you'll get your first report for free, but then you're automatically on a renewal. Well, you get charged every month for like $15 or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
And people don't realize that.
And of course, it's there like in the fine print, but no one
exactly. So the truth is, you can be savvy and sign up for some of those. I think, what's the first one? The other one's like First Credit or something. I can't remember the name. You can do it, and then, a minute later, call back and cancel it, or, whatever. It's not, but you are entitled to this free report. Like I said, if you want to see your score, and they do advertise now, this creditkarma.com.
Yeah.
It's actually fine. They have a pretty good, it's pretty accurate what they put in there. I mean, you will have a different score with each of those three bureaus, and sometimes it can be fairly different. I mean, a good distance from each other. Again, it's good to look at your report for a few reasons. One, you want to see what's on there, especially for issues of identity theft. If you're monitoring your report with some regularity, at least, every 4 months or something, you could see that. And that's one thing you can do. You can set it on your calendar. So, okay, it's January. I'm going to go ask for my free TransUnion report. It's April. Now I'm going to ask for my free Experian report. it's September. Now I'm going to ask for my free, what's the other one? Equifax report.
So every few months you're checking up on your report to make sure that your credit cards aren't opened in your name and all that kind of stuff.
And it's not 100%. Like I said, some things will be reported maybe on one, but it's usually pretty close. So it's a way to do that for free. And you can monitor your score through something like Credit Karma. They will be giving you advice. Since it is a free site, there's going to be ads and advice about this credit card might be good for you or something. You just have to understand that for what it is and read through it. But Credit Karma has a lot of good like simulators. How would my credit score change if I did this, which can be useful. So speaking of which, let's just say quickly about how do they come up with that score?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's like mythical score.
If we get this free credit report, can we do some calculations on our own?
And there are numbers that don't really seem to make sense at all, right? So what's the scale? Right?
Well, you want your credit score to be ideally sort of in that people say about 720 and above. An 800 is a good score. A 760 or so is a good score. Actually, 720 is often listed as the median for the country. Again, I work mostly with folks who, are sort of lower or moderate incomes, and their scores tend to be a good bit lower than that, I have to say. But you can get, like right now, for an FHA loan on a house, you could get a loan, and right now you'd get a good, reasonable rate of just over 4% with a credit score of, I think it has to be at least a 640. But it doesn't have to be an 800.
Oh, so you can get...
You can now. Again, situations change. So it's not like you can count on that. It's not like you can say, when I'm ready to buy a house in 3 years, I'll have a 640. It'll be perfect. You want to keep it as high as you can, within reason. But you don't want to be beholden to the credit gods either. So what do you do to keep it, what's in the score and what do you do about it? The most important component of your credit score is being on time. As soon as you're late, your score drops, and it drops more depending on how far does it have to fall. If you had a really good score and you're late, you'll lose more you'll lose more points than you would if your score was already kind of lousy. Is the case, but again, don't do it. Do not be late with your credit card payments. Whatever you have to do, pay at least the minimum, even if you're in that a bad month and, you're not sure, do not pay that late. It's not a good idea. And yes, people will tell you, but when did they report it? How late does it have to be? Don't get involved in that. Just pay that on time. You really just need to pay it on time.
And is paying only the minimum on a credit card
is fine.
Okay.
Well, yes and no. So as far as getting it in on time, it doesn't, as long as you've paid at least the minimum, you're covered from the aspect of lateness. And that's like 35% of your score, okay? So that's, again, if you have a car loan, all those things that are getting reported, you want to make sure that you're paying them on time. But little things too. You have some small thing. You get a bill from the emergency room. Now this actually may be changing, but for now it's still the case. People get like a little $50 copay or something. They ignore it. They forget about it. Eventually that winds up going to the credit bureaus, and now it's on your credit report as something you never paid. There are discussions right now about changing some of those medical bills actually on credit reports, but at the moment, so don't just ignore it is my advice to you if you come across something small like that even, because it can cause you a problem. The next thing that is the most important, and this is about what you say about paying minimums on your credit maybe, is what they call like the utilization of your credit. The credit card companies, people who are interested in potentially offering you credit, they want to see that you have credit that's available to you, but you're not using it. So it's sort of counterintuitive. They want to know that Jason has a credit card that he could be spending $5,000, but he's not maxing it out. He's only spending $500. Only 10% of what's available to him. He mustn't be desperate. He must be a good risk. So that actually helps your score.
So credit card companies raising your credit limits are actually a benefit to you.
It is to your score. And so, again, you have to assess, you have to know yourself. Is that bad for you to have too much credit available? But do you see the game?
Yeah.
On the one hand, let's just use, for the sake of an example. So Bank of America, they gave you that extra credit and they want you to spend it. They're the ones who have you have a credit card with them, trust me, they want you spending as much as possible.
Yeah.
But when you're applying for a new card with Chase wants to know that you're not spending everything up to the hilt.
Yeah.
Okay? Or when you're going for a mortgage, more importantly, or an auto loan, again, they want to see that you're not desperate. It's the desperation factor.
Because they always solicit for you to take out money. Like, I always get from Bank of America, you should take out a cash advance. Look at these low rates.
Stupid annoying things they send you every week. Those checks that you have to shred. Every week.
Yeah.
Oh, leave me alone.
Right. Now, they'll make you a lot of offers, and that is something that I think, many people have gotten savvier to that over time, but again, what are your own interests and values? Just because the credit card people think, because a lot of people I think have thought like that, they're like, oh, I must be good for it. They're willing to give me this credit, or I must be able to handle that kind of a mortgage if they're willing to give it to me. They have no idea, as we said, about your interests, your values. They don't care if you ever go to a movie. They don't care if you pay $1 bazillion in interest. They don't care about any of that. So don't let them tell you what you can and can't afford. Just because they're willing to give it to you, the credit, doesn't mean it's a good idea for you to take it or to take advantage of it. However, as I said, if you have a lot available to you that you're not using, that does look good for you. So if you're working on your credit as something that you're trying to, while you're in graduate school, if you're able to, if you're in a position to keep those debts down, that's the best to use. Don't use, if you're really trying to improve your credit, I wouldn't say don't use more than maybe 20% of what's available to you. And then pay it down completely every month. Some people think you need to keep a balance. You don't. You can pay it down 100% every month. It's good to have activity and to be using it, but don't use it a lot.
So that's one question. How important is it to have credit in general? I've met some people that are like, I don't want to get involved with that. I don't take out loans. I don't have a credit card. I do everything by checks and cash. That's how I work.
Yeah.
So that, I don't have any debt and all this kind of stuff. But is it important to have some kind of credit and to pay off these things?
It probably is. If you honestly think that you are never going to have to borrow money to buy a car or a home, then maybe you don't. Or a business, if you want to, because your credit will matter if you decide. And nobody knows for sure. People's situations change, your interests. Maybe you're going to do a startup or whatever. I would say that you should do no damage, and it's easy enough to establish credit, even in small ways. If you're somebody who's not had credit before, right, you don't have a track record, and this gets us to another portion of your credit score, and that is your history. That counts for about 15%. I think it's 15. It's either 10 or 15% of your score is how long have you had a track record? Did you just get your first credit card? Or have you had one since you were 18? I literally have a credit card from when I was an undergraduate. I've had this card for 30 years or something insane like that. But they do have a figure for the average number of years for the credit cards in particular that you've had. And that matters, longevity. If you've been able to demonstrate a longer track record, then they can, again, trust that you're a good credit risk. That's what this is all about. Somebody's trying to assess whether or not you're a good risk. And this is the way they do it. They don't get a letter from your professor. They don't talk to your boss. They look at this stuff to see what you've done. So you have to be in the game for a period of time if you're ever going to be able to show them that you know how to handle credit. And you do that by having access to credit. You don't have to use it a lot. Use it a little bit. Decide for yourself as just like a budgeting strategy or something. Have a credit card, etc. If you're somebody who's brand new, say you're new to the country, if you're an international student, or you just haven't had credit before, initial ones to try often, easier ones to get can be like department store cards and whatnot. But if you have no success getting that, and again, that doesn't mean you should go and spend on things that you don't want or need. Just keep it very small, pay it off every month, that's it. But another option is to get a secured credit card. which you can get from, any bank. Essentially, this works the way a security deposit does on a housing rental. You would give them $350 cash, or $500 or whatever it is, and they're going to hold on to that for you as like a security deposit. And then they'll give you a card that has that as its limit. And you would use that for a period of time, and usually after 6 months, a year of good behavior on it, so to speak, you can then turn it into a quote-unquote regular card. But that's how you can start establishing credit if it's not something
That's a great idea.
Never heard of that.
that
No, I
you've had
hadn't either.
before. And it is available, like I said. People who've had bad credit, if you've had some troubles with credit in the past, that might be the option for you, because you need an opportunity to demonstrate that you can handle this. And that gives you that chance. But again, if you have a very small limit, $350 or $500, you shouldn't be putting more than $50, $100. If it's a $500 limit, definitely not more $100. And I would use it like that. Groceries, something I know I need anyway. And that's what I do. I spend $100 on it. The bill comes, I pay it in 100%, boom. So, but that's the history, and that makes a difference. Two last parts of your credit score that matter are, one is inquiries. And what they mean by that is, again, this gets back a little bit to the desperation factor. Are you applying for credit all over town? Going, trying to get anybody and everybody to give you a card or whatever.
Because they track how many times your credit score has been checked.
They know.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you do want to be... So every time you go to Target and they say, oh, would you like to save 5% today? You bought a pack of Double Mint, or, whatever it may be. Then that is, they are checking your credit. When you say yes, and they take your social security number, they are doing an inquiry on you, and you are applying for credit. So that sort of kind of counts against you. It doesn't count a lot, but it does count. So again, if you don't really care to get that card, there is a little bit of a penalty for doing it. The one exception to keep in mind is if you are shopping for like a mortgage or an auto loan, they get that you're going to be shopping around. You're going to get a variety of quotes. If you do that within a short period of time, it varies, 2 weeks or something like that, they'll sort of count it as one inquiry. But it is sometimes something to keep in mind. So like if you're applying for a mortgage and your score is kind of borderline, if you do that, that might drop it, and then you're not really ready to get the mortgage, and then 4 months later it hasn't recovered yet. So you kind of want to be careful about what you do with that kind of debt. And the last thing to keep in mind as far as, I'm sorry, I did want to say one other thing with that. With the inquiries, if you get your own credit score, that doesn't count against you.
Okay.
If you come to like a credit counselor or something and they check your score, they're going to tell you what's called, what the industry terms a soft pull. You're not asking for credit. You're just trying to assess your situation. That is not considered that kind of an inquiry. Auto insurance, which also looks at your credit in terms of determining your rates. It's another reason why credit is important.
Oh, jeez.
They will do an inquiry, but not one that is considered for credit, so it is also considered a soft inquiry.
Okay.
But they do know.
No.
All right, and finally...
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Just get away from it.
It is. Finally, the last thing is what kinds of debt do you have? People who give out credit, they really like it when you're like, oh, you have a mortgage and you have a car and you have 5 credit cards and, you sort of fit a certain kind of a mold, as opposed to somebody who's got one credit card from, Fashion Bug or something and a secured card. And, they like to see that kind of variety. Again, should you take out a car loan just for the purposes of that? I would say absolutely not. But that is also a small portion. I think it's like 10% is like kind of variety of types of credit, matter.
So really one of the best things to do maybe is even if you know you can afford to pay something off immediately, that you maybe put it on your credit cards, that it's like, I've spent something,
Yeah.
and then pay it off immediately that next month, because
Right.
you had the money in the bank. It's just you're
That's right.
supporting your credit score
Right.
a little bit by putting it on the card or taking out a
Right.
small
It's got to
loan
be
or
part of a
something like that.
plan. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to have it as part of a plan. And again, this goes back once again to the know yourself part. So if you know that you are not a good person to have a credit card in their hands and this and that, then, you may not be able to play a lot of these, kinds of games. You'll have to be really careful about how to do it because you got to keep your eye on the prize. The bigger picture is, sticking within your spending plan and your saving plan and all those kinds of things. You don't want to start getting into debt. You have to set yourself up for success. So you've got to find ways that really work for you. Maybe you get, a friend to hold on to the card for you, and it's only when you go to Trader Joe's together that you're allowed to use it. Or, find some way that works for who you are to accomplish the goal you're trying to accomplish and not get yourself into trouble.
Perfect. Yeah.
So much advice.
So much
oh my
gosh. All this advice. Really good stuff. But I guess on the topic of advice, and then we'll use this to wrap up, what we like asking everyone is what kind of advice you'd be giving to your second or third year self, when you were back in grad school, and you were back in grad school a little bit ago.
Yeah.
What would you tell her? What would you be like, and I guess maybe financially, how would you advise her?
Right. Well, I would say a couple of things, but I think the biggest thing is that question of sort of finding your balance. And again, not to beat a horse, but I really do think it gets back to this issue of knowing who you are. I mean, I was thinking back to that with grad school, and I remember it took me a while to get a real balance as to how much time I would spend writing my dissertation or doing the research or whatever it was I was doing at the time. And there were a couple of things with that. So one, I will say, was a piece of advice that I got from somebody else that I thought was really good, and I eventually put it into play. And that was to give myself a break in terms of my work output, or how much effort I put into or time, I should say, really, I spent on my work. So I would say to find a balance there, again, where you have a plan. So you tell yourself from 5 o'clock on Friday, for example, until, maybe noon on Sunday, or whatever seems reasonable to you, that you budget, so to speak, plan out that time as being a work-free zone. And so you now have, because you've established it, and you're planning on it, you can work accordingly during the rest of the week, which will probably be really hard, because you know you're not going to have time on Saturday because that's your off day, 100%. But then when you are off, you can really own it and enjoy it. And I think along those lines, also time-wise, it took me a while to know myself and realize that I was not very productive in the evenings. And it took me a long time to get to grips with that. And so, this was another sort of way of time management, was to sort of realize that I would get so much more work done from, the moment I woke up in the morning. I would literally walk from my room directly to the computer, and it was like my mind was free and I could write, for 2 hours. And then in the evening, I would bang out, 3 sentences in 2 hours or something.
And you feel so burnt out.
And I was like, why? Okay, just face the facts. You are crap at this at night. And stop trying to, but my husband was also, he was in graduate school and he was always doing academic work, and he could work anytime. So, it made me feel bad and everything. But I came to grips with that. It's just not me. I just wasn't able to produce that way. I was great in, the mornings. I was like fabulous. So I think coming to grips with that, like you say, time management, not unlike financial management, understand who you are, your strengths and your weaknesses, and, accept that to some extent. Maybe try to get better at some things that, warrant it, but certainly don't deny it and don't be unaware of it.
Thanks to Patricia for her insight on financial basics. Do you have any suggestions for making the most of your money? Leave a comment at phdinprogress.com/15 or email us at feedback@phdinprogress.com. If you'd like to help support the show, take 2 minutes right now to leave an honest review and rating in the iTunes store. This goes a long way to boost visibility of the show so that others can hear about us. Listener and Matt Wilk, who gave us a 5-star review, said, "Great topics, a good laugh, and helpful advice for graduate students. A mix of thought-provoking statements and well-placed humor make this podcast a joy to listen to and is great for busying your mind while doing mindless tasks during your day. Thank you so much for your review." Say hi to us on Twitter at PhD Podcast and share any links you'd like us to discuss on the show. As always, all the information and links we talked about today can be found at phdinprogress.com.
Trash diving. Comes to diving for free food.
Yeah, so you want to get your dignity back, essentially.